Welcome to the Rotary Times Show, a public service program presented by Rotary District 7610, Virginia. Funding for this program is made possible by the generosity of Rotary District 7610, Virginia. On our programs, we talk with Rotarians and community leaders and discuss Rotary International and how at each level we help local, national, and world communities. I am your host, Rotarian Dr. Deborah Jackson from the Rotary Club of McLean, Virginia. Today we have a remote guest, and I'm so delighted that this guest will bring information to us that we've been hearing about recently. We've heard researchers talking about two specific terms, implicit and explicit bias, within the context of social justice. We know that both represent attitudes that cause people to look at given circumstances in a way that is often not objective and maybe not even fair. But we've also learned that people can be biased for many different reasons, but not be conscious of their biases and how it's impacting their behavior or their response to a specific topic. To help us explore the topic a little bit more, we have with us Dr. Bentley Gibson out of Decatur, Georgia, the founder of the Implicit Bias Adjuster. Welcome, Dr. Gibson, to the Rotary Times Show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So before we start, I want our viewing audience to hear a little bit about you. Tell us about Dr. Gibson and how you got involved in this research.
Well, I like to say this has been my life journey. I have been obsessed with race and racism and prejudice since a child. I walked into my predominantly white classroom in White Plains, New York, and I noticed even at 4, children treating each other differently based off of gender and race, body size. Noticed this as a child. So I said, why not go study it and get a PhD in it? And so I went to Emory for graduate school in 2008. And at that time, implicit bias had been around studying it for about a decade. The test, the IAT, came out in around 98 when people started actually going to that Harvard website and testing their own implicit biases. And I started doing my research on it in 2008, really focusing on when in development do implicit biases come online? Do young children have them, and how to assess them and the best way to mitigate them?
Okay, wonderful. So help my audience and understand, again, I said implicit and explicit. What do we mean specifically when we talk about implicit bias?
Implicit bias is a concept that's been around dealing with a part of us that we may not be aware of, right? A part of our brain that we're not conscious of, yet still impacts behavior. So, for example, we may want to see ourselves. This is my daughter. She's coming in.
Okay.
Say hello. Hi. Yes, you can have one, baby. I'm in a meeting. One more? Yes, go on. So implicit bias is when we want to see ourselves as a good person, yet we have these things that we've developed since childhood that are impacting how we evaluate others as well as how we behave, that we may not even be aware that it's impacting.
And how does it differ from our beliefs and, and our self-reported attitudes that we have?
So oftentimes when people take an unconscious bias measurement, there is a dissonance between how they actually feel they believe and what happens on these unconscious bias assessments. So for example, for race, they will take an unconscious bias race test and it'll say you have an unconscious white bias. But people will say, no, I don't really feel that way. I'll hear things like, I have Black friends, many of things, but yet on the unconscious level, there is a dissonance between how they feel and their unconscious brain.
Okay, and they're just not aware of some of those feelings. That's interesting.
That's right. And it's not really feelings, because feelings is more so the explicit part of us, right? What we think and what we're conscious of. But these unconscious attitudes are different from feelings and need to be brought to consciousness in order to understand how they're impacting what we do.
I gotcha. How can an individual assess their own implicit bias then?
Yes, so there's no such thing as a perfect assessment, I like to tell people, right? But we want to go to the assessment that's been around the longest and also the assessment that has the most validity and reliability. So the implicit association test has been around for a while. It's been around. It was created in 1995 by Anthony Greenwald and Banaji, and they said we have to go beyond asking people what their racial attitudes are, because if we do, there are confounds there. Like, people will give socially desirable responses, and they may not even be aware of what their attitudes are about these social groups. So the implicit association test, I won't really get really into the methodology, but go take one. There's one for race, there's one for gender, there's one for religion. I have my trainees take at least three: the race, the gender, career, and the sexuality.
Okay.
And in this, you can get access to a part of your brain you may not have known existed.
Wow, wow, that's pretty powerful. So the race, the gender, and what was the third one?
Sexuality.
The sexuality. Interesting. So when we do that, does it tell us whether or not this was formed when we were born, or is it learned behavior?
So the test will not tell you when you formed the bias, right? What it will tell you is, and again, it's not a perfect assessment, but there's a lot of research behind it in terms of what does this test mean for real world behaviors. And so the test will tell you, can you associate Black people with positive words on the unconscious level? And most people cannot. Most people are not even neutral when it comes to the race test. For the gender test, for example, they'll look at, can you associate women in the workplace, or do you associate women at home? And as you can imagine, most people, even some women, right? Women in the workplace can still not, on the unconscious level, see themselves in the workplace and just easierly see themselves at home.
Okay. How about in sexuality? How does that one work?
Now, that one is actually the one individuals in society were actually doing better on. So it looks at, and there's still, that one has not been around as long as the race test, but it looks at, can you see gay people with positive words or heterosexual people with positive words? In general, most people are not neutral, and they don't see gay people easily with positive words unless they've had certain experiences interacting with, right, in positive manners with these members of negatively stereotyped groups. That's what gets people closer to neutral, or even seeing people from negatively stereotyped groups as positive. But most people have a pro-white, pro-straight, pro-male unconscious bias and are not even at the.
And well, let me ask you this. So does it matter then whether or not they have these experiences with, I'm thinking from an organizational perspective now, thinking about systems thinking, do you need to have those experiences to be where you have to have these individuals there represented at the table to help address some of that or shape some of that thinking?
One of the main, there are two ways actually to shift unconscious biases that are the top main ways, right? Number one is people need new information about these negatively stereotyped groups that they haven't gotten before probably. And if they didn't get it, it's going to be hard for them to see these groups that have been negatively stereotyped in a positive or even neutral manner. So that's one way. Vivid, counter stereotypical information. What are you watching? What are you reading? What are you consuming? And is it actually counteracting biases and stereotypes about these groups that we know and that we've known since we were children, okay? If you're not getting that, it's going to be hard to get to this neutral place. The other way is actually experiences with these people, right? Experiences with Black people, experiences with women in leadership, right? And not just at home. Experiences that are counter to these stereotypes. If we're not getting those, it's going to be very difficult for us to get to this neutral place. Now, my research has shown, say you haven't gotten those experiences, you better have a certain type of personality that's very open-minded, conscientious, willing to rethink, and then this will be less likely to impact your behaviors, right? There's a bunch of things that go into this. Your personality, have you had the information to mitigate it, and the experiences. And that's really the trifecta to get to this neutral place.
And most people don't bring that to the table.
And that's why most people are not neutral. People get in-group oriented, and we've learned these stereotypes since children. Every time we turn on the TV, we're oftentimes receiving information that is fueling the fire to the stereotype instead of counteracting it.
That's interesting. That's good to know. As we consider as an organization such as Rotary, who is committed to ensuring that we can move that needle in the organization to make that a little more, get to that neutral zone that you just spoke about.
That's
And
right.
I
That's right.
suspect it won't be, sounds like it won't be easy.
I missed that last one.
I said it sounds like it will not be easy.
Very much so. And it's like people will have good intentions to want to get to the neutral place, but don't know the right methods to get there.
Gotcha.
Oftentimes, for example, I just did a study that looked at the types of information we're receiving about Black people in a historical context. And oftentimes, if we're just focusing on Black people in the context of Jim Crow, slavery, oppression, on the unconscious level, that actually increases white bias and gets us further away from neutral.
So we need to see more positives in our organizations, in our books, in our classrooms, and in our experiences, one-on-one experiences.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And information that is strategically counteracting those stereotypes. And oftentimes people, especially with certain personality traits, they will not be open enough to receive that information, right? Information that counteracts these stereotypes that we may even think are valid, but we learn through new information and experiences that they're not so much valid.
I got you. That's it. This is very interesting as, again, as our organization or our district looks at how we can navigate some of this. As we look at diversity and equity and inclusion. That's our mission. It's a mission of Rotary International, and we have to look at ways to make those things happen. But it sounds like we have to start with this conversation that we're talking about right now.
It's deep work, Deborah. I tell you the honest truth. It starts with the individual realizing that, look, I have these biases and it's impacting my behaviors. What behaviors does it impact? Everything from your nonverbal communication all the way to some of your explicit verbal things like microaggressions. That's one training I've been doing a lot in terms of people saying the wrong things, even well-intentioned people. But if you have these biases and you don't have the experiences to mitigate them, even well-intentioned folks may say the wrong thing or even non-verbally do the wrong things that make for a not inclusive environment.
Gotcha. Yeah, I hear you. We're hearing, seeing a lot of that. So we can safely say these biases aren't necessarily anything you're born with, but they are shaped by your environment.
That's a whole nother training, Deborah. I'm sure, and I teach this in my psychology classes. We are born with a bias to just want to be around people. And if you think about the newborn baby, it's helpless, it's hopeless. It can't do anything, right? But think about that newborn baby, it'll go to anybody at first, right? As long as somebody will feed me and take care of me, right? It can learn any language at first, doesn't matter, right? It's just looking for that human communication. But after a while of being on the planet, even 6 months, the baby knows this is my person, you know? These are my people. And if even at that 6-month baby age, they're not getting exposure to different types of people and different types of information because they can see, they can hear, they could be developing these biases and have them already online before they can even talk.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a short break and come back and talk more with Dr. Bentley Gibson, the founder of the Implicit Bias Adjuster. Please stay with us.
Possibilities are all around us. We see potential in unexpected places. And when we share our knowledge, vision, and connections, we turn great ideas into action in communities all around the world. Together, we can make real change happen. We're Rotary. We are people of action. Get involved at Rotary.org.
Welcome back to the Rotary Times. We are here talking with Dr. Bentley Gibson, the founder of the Implicit Bias Adjuster. And we were just talking briefly about some of the factors that contribute to biases, but let's talk with those that contribute to implicit bias. What are some of the factors that you would describe that impact it?
Yeah, so I've been recently looking at factors that can even predict how people will score on an implicit race bias test. The 3 main factors I found that I can use to predict what they'll get: where they grew up. Did you grow up in an area that were even around people of color? That's one factor, their personality traits, so how open-minded they are they imaginative, are they artistic even, and how conscientious they are. So do they think outside the box? Are they lazy? Are they impulsive? Those factors go into how neutral a person is.
Yeah.
So even, for example, I found people who may have grown up in all white environments, don't have that many Black friends, yet can still get to this neutral place because that's just their personality, right? To think outside the box, to be imaginative, to imagine beyond these stereotypes. But if you're somebody who's grown up in a predominantly white environment, you don't have that many Black friends, you better hope that your personality is a certain way to really not let these biases get the best of you, even non-verbally, or sometimes you just may not be having your best day, for example. That's when this unconscious bias comes out, right? You may be tired, you're stressed. Now your personality and your biases may do something that you didn't mean to do even, maybe.
Right.
And now you've gotten your rough spot.
Gotcha. That's when people say things they don't intend, as you just said.
Yes,
Yeah.
Freudian slips. Remember, you've heard of a Freudian slip, but unconscious, Freud was about the unconscious brain, right? And so that's how this plays out with bias. It's through those Freudian bias slips. It just happened to me today.
It just happens. Okay.
Yeah.
How has it changed over time, and is it actually changing?
We're going nowhere fast on some of this stuff, okay? Because people are not tackling it the way that research shows is effective. We're having all these conversations. We'll change laws and change policies, yet still on the unconscious level, people can't see Black people as positive. So until we get the strategies that work and get it in children instead of waiting until we're adults, we're going to still see this playing out. We're going to have another social justice movement in another 20 years because folks may not have still done the work, even good-intentioned folks who want to be allies, who want to do the work, but still don't know how to change that unconscious brain, which is different from the explicit brain.
Wow, that's interesting. It explains why someone will say, why are we still 40 years later or 50 years later still having these same conversations? Yeah, we move forward a little bit, but we don't move far enough. What can we do as individuals to change our implicit bias?
We have to strategically change what we're consuming about these groups that we know and have known since children are negatively stereotyped. We can do this at home, right? I'm doing trainings in terms of broadening our networks and barriers to our networks, even simply using LinkedIn and social media. Who are we networking with? What are we watching on TV? What are we reading? And are the things we're watching and reading fueling the fire for these stereotypes, or really challenging us to get new information outside of those stereotypes?
Gotcha. How does it impact the cultural climate of a company or an organization? I wanted us to drill down a little bit and look at the climate of an organization now when we have these biases playing out.
So my latest research is showing that what I do is I look at the aggregated unconscious biases of an organization. So I just look at, everybody's there who we can get to volunteer to take a cultural climate assessment. Let's look at how people in general are scoring on these unconscious bias assessments. And then let's look at what's the relationship between those unconscious bias assessments and how people feel in that organization. And what I'm finding is if the unconscious biases, for example, are too strongly white, then guess how people of color feel there? There are disparities. But when I find these companies that don't have too strong of these biases, there are less disparities. So the more companies have people there who are aware of their biases, who are closer to this neutral place, the less disparities and inclusion there are.
Well, how will one know? How would an employer know on an interview? I mean, it's not something you can ask on an interview. How would you know?
If you have a bias?
If this individual that you are considering hiring in a leadership position, how would that employer know that this individual is not at that neutral level?
Well, first off, you need to start engaging with the employee. One thing you can always tell is if you put somebody in an intergroup or inter-race dynamic, are they comfortable in that, right? So one thing called intergroup anxiety that comes out is people's kind of uncomfortability that may come with interacting with people that are not in their same group, or people from negatively stereotyped groups, right? So really just watching how people interact, not just verbally, not just what they say, but non-verbally, right, can tell you a lot about people and their biases. What have they done in terms of learning about bias? That you can learn even from their resume. Have they had any training experiences that have helped them learn about things like microaggressions, non-verbal bias, confirmation bias? Do they know these concepts? And if you start asking them about them and they don't know, they might tell you something, and watch how they interact with people of these groups. That'll tell you even more.
And what was that? You said something about a conversational bias?
Confirmation bias. So
Confirmational, okay.
yeah, so people oftentimes want to confirm their beliefs, confirm their biases, and it's like a feel-good thing, that desire to be right. And instead of looking for information that doesn't confirm bias, people will often look for information that confirms the bias. So that goes back to really counteracting these stereotypes and strategically looking for information that counteracts your bias. And sometimes that can be difficult to do.
Okay, these are all really, I mean, honestly, we could do a whole day on this talking about
I
some of
know.
these topics.
I've been doing it all day today. I'm glad to be here, but I've literally been talking about this all day, and it just gives me life.
When your students, and I know that you are a professor in the state of Georgia, what are their responses? Do they just sign up for your class because this is something that is, or is it part of a curriculum that you are responsible for?
I love that question. I actually teach a 10-week course that's just on implicit bias. That's voluntary. And so when I started teaching it about 2-3 years ago, it was like only 3-4 students. But now, well, with COVID, I mean, I'm in Georgia, so we're back open. We live in another world out here. So I only have 8 students in the class, but it's booked to capacity because we're only allowed 8 students in the class. They love it. I test them at the beginning of the course and look where they are on their unconscious biases. And if you could guess, most of them have a white bias when they come to the class. These are not just white students, it's also students of color. And what I do is aggregate to look and see, well, where are you before we even start talking about this? And then I test them again 10 weeks later, and they have become more neutralized.
Do you use the same tool for companies and organizations you would do the same thing? You go in, do this, have some kind of discussion around it or engagement with the topic, and then come back and retest? How does that work?
We retest the individuals, but we also retest the cultural climate to see if what we're doing is actually changing. That cultural climate lets us see before we do anything, do we have any disparities here? Are there issues? Where are the issues? And how is the organization's unconscious bias playing into these issues? And after we have those learning opportunities and people learn even how this is impacting their nonverbal behaviors, they then start shifting. They start shifting in terms of knowing what to do to actually tackle this. And it can change cultural climates of organizations, I've found, even in 6 months' time, in terms of how people are feeling. But then it can even change how they're hiring once they learn how these unconscious biases play out into hiring practices. It's a continual learning experience that people have to do in the job, but also at home by themselves and with their children and spouses and partners and parents. I'm always trying to think of it from an organizational, because that's what we're about, systems, and how we can navigate a path forward to change the systems that we currently have. Rotary International has committed to diversity and inclusion and equity. Right? Our District 7610 under our current district governor is also, in fact, it started with our previous district governor who put it on the map that these were things that we needed to be looking at in order for us to have a future in this organization. If we truly believe that the social injustices that we've seen are real and need to be changed, then we have to change the thinking of our members. But we also know that not everyone is ready, and it is about readiness, would you say? It's about readiness, and you have to meet people where they are and help them realize the value of understanding their unconscious biases and why they have them and mitigating them, so that at the lowest level, at least they don't commit microaggressions. look at people in a way that they didn't intend to, because they didn't get the experience and the information to kind of get them out of that. I mean, and at the end of the day, I just saw today, there's a whole restaurant in Atlanta that's now being shut down because the owner did not take the time to become aware of how his biases and his personality can end his entire business.
Oh, wow, that's serious business then.
Serious business. You
Yeah.
want to become aware of this and how it's impacting your interactions with others, the cultural climate of your organization, even how much impact can you really have as an organization if you have good intentions, but on the unconscious level have a hard time really seeing these negatively stereotyped group members in a positive way.
That is interesting. We've learned a lot. If you had a final thought that you would leave with us, what would you leave us with?
The goal is to get closer to this neutral place, and most people are not there. And it's these learning experiences through effective training, right? Anybody can learn theory about implicit bias, but can you learn that you actually have these biases, how it's impacting your behaviors, and find value in getting closer to that neutral place?
That's the value proposition that's huge. That's very serious and important. Well, we want to thank you, for that, because what we hear a lot about is diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, a lot of initiatives, but it sounds like we need to go beyond the initiative. It's nice having that initiative,
Yes.
but what are we doing with it? So thank you for being a guest with us today, and I hope you'll join us again to come back. And then on behalf of Rotary, we're very happy that you've agreed to even work with us as we look to change the way we're doing business. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and I look forward to joining you again.
Great. Funding for this program is made possible by the generosity of Rotary District 7610, Virginia. For the Rotary Times program, I am your host, Rotarian Dr. Deborah Jackson from the Rotary Club of McLean, Virginia. You are welcome to join us at a Rotary Club in your area for either breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You can find a club near you by looking us up on the internet. There are many clubs who are hosting meetings virtually or in some hybrid approach. You just need to look us up for details. Remember, our time is your time, and it's time well spent. Please join us for our next program as we continue to celebrate Rotary's 115 years of service above self.